Hello, I'm Martha Angber, host of Vigilant Positivity, a blog and podcast meant to decrease polarization by uniting Americans through civil discussion that leads to common ground. Thanks to those of you who tuned in. Please feel free to subscribe and grow the Common Ground movement. Every month, I try to do a citizen spotlight to cast a light on other Americans on both sides of the political spectrum who are working hard to decrease polarization. Today, I'm talking with Allison K. Ralph. Hello, Allison.
Hi, Martha.
Allison is the founder of Cohesion Strategy, which specializes in pluralistic systems. They work to understand, synthesize, and clarify pluralistic fields for the organizations shaping them. A PhD in church history with a master's degree in philosophy, Allison is a consultant, bridge builder, thought leader, and researcher who specializes in pluralism, which is the concept that rather than apply one approach to solving a problem, policy should use many strategies with the goal of addressing the various needs of everyone in our diverse population, especially when it comes to religion. So let's go ahead with our questions. I invited you here today because I was fascinated by your recent article titled "We Need a New Metaphor of Us" in the Fulcrum that addresses selling pluralism and the bridging movement to Americans. But before we get to that, I think we'd all benefit from a little background, especially regarding terminology. Let's start with pluralism. Can you give us a more detailed picture of what it is and why it matters?
Sure. I think the easiest way to describe pluralism is the fact that we are going to have to figure out how to work with each other and stay together somehow, even though we are never, ever, ever, ever going to really agree across all of our differences, even in societies that are very that have a really tight-knit culture. There's still diversity. There's diversity of opinion. Folks disagree. We get strong feelings about this. Groups break up. That's human history. Pluralism is the ability to manage that diversity. And we are in a highly diverse society. We come from lots of different places. We have lots of different religious beliefs in the US. We have lots of different viewpoints. We have wide age diversity, income diversity, rural, urban, all of these kinds of ways of being are very different, different sets of assumptions, all that kind of stuff. And if each of one of us were going to create our own little perfect world, um, pretty much none of us, of the, what is it, 360 million of us, would actually agree. So we're going to have to figure out how we sort through these differences when some of those differences are going to remain no matter what we do. That's what I mean by pluralism. So anything that helps us do that, whether that's bridging and relationship work, whether it's citizens' assemblies or other kinds of deliberative democracy that get folks involved in creating policies that work for everybody in a whole community, anything that gets us further down that road, those are pluralistic solutions.
Ah. When reading your resume, I was fascinated by your seemingly circuitous journey to pluralism. Can you tell us how your love of history and religion led you first to pluralism and then politics in our democracy?
Sure. I fell into the wider pluralistic and democracy space because I had already fallen backwards into religious pluralism and religious difference. I grew up atheist in the Bible Belt in the South. That was frankly, a really terrible experience for me personally. I experienced a lot of bullying in my hometown high school, and though I was able to get out of my hometown high school experience, I left very angry and dogmatically atheist. And I was
Mm.
trying to figure out what happened. How did we get here? My favorite line from my entire experience at my hometown high school is a girl who leans over to me and at a pep rally in my freshman year of high school, and she goes, "Try reading the Bible, bitch,"
Ooh.
which uh, is so it's so memorable. It just really sticks with you.
Uh,
And
I
also I'm
have to
thinking
imagine people who practice Christianity are listening to this and cringing
for
that that would
sure,
be somebody would
for
say, a
sure.
Christian would claim to say something so
For
unchristian.
sure. And she was among a group of students who often wore WWJD bracelets. I don't know if you remember those from the 90s. It's short for what would
Ah,
Jesus do?
ah,
I don't think Jesus would have said that.
yeah,
Just, you know.
yeah.
So I was trying to figure out, I had read much of the Bible out of interest, and I knew that that didn't make sense. And I didn't understand how do we get from the Gospels to this kind of behavior. And what was happening to me is not the worst thing that people do to each other over religious difference. Like that's really clear.
Mhm.
So I was just like, what happened? How did we get here? So I became interested in the history of religion, and in particular, the history of Christianity and how Christianity, the Christian community, comes to justify the enormous quantity and variety of violence that those communities over the last couple thousand years have justified, both including theologically justified. That yes, this is what God wants us to do.
And I
Uh,
guess also, I guess we could say in here, I imagine people are listening and they're like, well, how about those other religions? And I think it's fair to say that the other religions have erred gravely as well. Is
Oh,
that,
for sure. For
yeah.
sure. Yes, this is not, oh, those terrible Christians. It turns out that this is, oh, those terrible humans. And that human beings have a habit of making excuses for othering and excluding other people. And that's what led me into I ended up doing a PhD in early Christian history at Catholic University of America,
Mhm.
studying those early Christian communities, trying to understand what happened in those few hundred years, especially that time period when Christian communities suddenly had access to imperial power after the conversion of Constantine around 310.
Mm.
And Christian communities behaved not that different but from before that time period and after that time period, but they suddenly had access to imperial power and were making use of it in different sorts of ways. Um, so all of that work around heresy and orthodoxy in the early Christian communities around how are people supposed to believe and behave helped me to understand how communities who are really genuinely trying to figure out how we are supposed to be together across our differences also end up justifying exclusion or trying to control their members, or sometimes it's both. Just what do they do with that? Again, natural human diversity.
Mm.
And that
Yeah.
has continued to inform all of my work as I've moved into the greater pluralistic and pro-democracy fields. Again, it's all about how are we going to figure out how to stay together.
Well, in terms of pluralism, why is it important for bettering America? We have been a diverse culture for as long as we've existed. So I assume that people throughout time have understood that. So in telling them about pluralism now, what's the argument for making America better? How is it going to make the average person's life better?
Yeah. There since our founding moments, when John Winthrop and company are stepping into what is now Massachusetts in the early days, they were arguing right from the get about what is our community supposed to be like? How are we, with those folks were thinking, how are we supposed to serve God? How are we supposed to treat each other, and how are we supposed to form our government? There has never, ever been a time when we have not been arguing over what the common good should be, ever. It's
Mm,
constant. And
yeah.
that includes the interactions, not just between the early settlers themselves, but between them and the folks who were already here, and the folks who were being brought here against their will. All of those kinds of things. This is big public conversation about what are we supposed to do together. So we have never not had those discussions. And it has been those moments in our history when we have failed to have those discussions well that have been the worst in our history. the lead up and the action of the Civil War. The terrible political violence of the 70s, the
Mm.
terrible violence that accompanied the civil rights movements, and what was happening in Jim Crow South, the push that was behind the civil rights movement. So the more that we are able to surface and understand how we are different, that means that we are then able to understand how we can collectively build something better. But it's all of these tensions that are underneath. When we can't get them out in the open and deal with them, that's when they break us.
So does it help to actually have a word for it? I find that people tend to struggle because they don't have words for things. So if you introduce this term, it's we live in a pluralistic society. That means there are a lot of us who have a lot of different, who are very different, have a lot of different beliefs. And so we have to figure out how to work together. So that kind of helps in a discussion rather than saying, hey, this is what I think it should be like, and the other person saying this is what I think should be the other. In other words, very individualistic a look at it, just kind of getting our society to admit that we're really different.
Yeah, pluralism does that in a nutshell. And not everybody likes that term. If we need to just say, listen, let's all figure out how to work together when we
Mm,
are not, we're not trying to push to all be the same. This is not about kumbaya. We are going to continue to have our differences, but how are we really going to work together for the common good? What's
mm,
possible if we're able to connect to each other in a different way? That
mm.
takes a lot of syllables. But maybe sometimes it's easier to do that with words that are more accessible than pluralism, which most folks don't use and don't know what it means.
Yeah. Might sound elitist or what have you, because
Sure.
there are a lot of trigger words in our society at this time, aren't there?
Exactly. Yeah. And if that's not a word that folks want to use, totally fine.
There you go. Well, can you give us a brief idea of how Cohesion Strategy, your company, helps nonprofit organizations take a pluralistic approach to problem solving? In other words, if you're not using the term pluralist, it just means having them consider all of the different viewpoints before they make a decision, I assume.
I would say sometimes it's more about mindsets and skill sets than you have to consider every single viewpoint before you make a decision. It's more yeah, let me I'm gonna back up. You might have to
I
cut this
guess
part.
that's I guess that's a really good thing that you just said because some people might hear pluralism and they're like, that'll never work because you can't take everybody's opinion into account. So
Exactly.
what you're saying is that you get a concept of how to the different mindsets involved, which you can group, and that makes it more manageable. Is that correct?
I think pluralism itself is a mindset. Let me put it that way.
Ah,
That rather than saying we need to understand every single viewpoint and adjudicate them in some way, although depending on the size of your group, that can be a good idea. Um, it's more about instead of saying somebody else disagrees with me and therefore they must be stupid or bad or evil. It is more about somebody else disagrees with me. I wonder why, and if I have anything to learn from them, and even if I still think they're wrong, maybe we can agree on something anyway.
yes.
So it's that mindset shift toward curiosity and learning, and
Okay.
then a recognition that you can probably still agree on lots of things, even if you're going to hold on to your strong differences.
Hmm. Well, it's really good that you've laid the groundwork for us so that we can talk about messaging. I've been studying the bridging movement, what I call the common ground movement, for the last few years, and the concept of drawing Americans together on common ground so we can help solve big problems at the local, state, national levels. This can be housing, climate change, healthcare, etc. It seems an obvious win, but getting Americans to understand we're all on the same team, we're different, but we're all on the same team, and that we should work together appears to be an almost insurmountable hurdle. If I interpreted your article correctly, it's because the bridging movement has a foundational messaging problem. And so that's what I want to ask you. What is that?
Sure. I think essentially this is not just the bridging movement has a foundational messaging problem. I think that humans in general haven't figured out how to talk about pluralism and how to continue negotiating togetherness over difference. I don't think we've only been doing this, really trying hard to do this collaborative um, co-governance thing, including all of these people who are very different from us, for a few hundred years. That's not a lot of time to develop a language when our language is, has roots several thousand years old. And
Yeah.
I'm tying this back to those roots that are several thousand years old because the most of the metaphors that we use in modern English around who we are as people are thousands of years old and come with thousands of years of built up meaning and sets of assumptions about what we are or what us is.
And a lot of baggage, I'm assuming.
Tons of baggage. But yeah, we can't use this language um, for, metaphors of us without all of those sets of assumptions. And the thing that's super, super important about metaphors is that metaphors aren't just nice linguistic tools that we can use them to describe something that's otherwise really complicated. It's that once we use them to describe things that are really complicated, they actually structure our view of the world. They structure our way that we perceive the world around us. And once that happens, it is very difficult for us to think about things in a different way. So I'm gonna the our argument that I made in the article is talking about body, social body language. So this is ancient language. It's at least 2,500 years old. It's nearly universal. It shows up in cultures, ancient and indigenous and Western cultures around the world across time, because it's the most obvious metaphor for a collection of parts, which is what a human society is, and that's the social body. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm all excited about the topic. Can you give an example of somebody in a town square, for example, saying, "Oh, it's like this," and use a body metaphor that.
Oh, for sure. For sure. So, for example, to take an issue that's in the news a lot right now and has been in the last 6 months or so about immigration. Immigration, there's a lot of metaphors about immigrants um, as disease or as a cancer in the body or as
uh,
a sickness in the body or a sickness in the bloodstream of the community, all of these kinds of things.
and so
Uh,
that makes us as humans feel like it's happening to us.
exactly.
Mm,
Exactly. Uh, and so and it's super easy to use that language, right? Our community is sick. These
mm,
foreigners are coming in and making us sick. They're taking our jobs. They're um, draining away our lifeblood. So it's
mm. Lifeblood. I
very
see.
easy to use this language
Yeah.
that is all pulling on this metaphor of the community as a body and is usually meant to be a human body. Um, another another one that I often see in the religious space is one religion or another, or a sect or another, is called cancer, a cancer in the body, or those ideas are a cancer in the body. They're heretical. That's
Mm,
and once, what do you do with a cancer? You kill it or you cut it out. That's
mm.
once you start using these metaphors, you then are kind of, as I said, you're sort of stuck with them without realizing it. You're kind of stuck in that mindset. And
Because
then
you have visuals. You imagine
exactly,
some sort of mole that's growing huge and ugly, or
exactly, or a
uh,
lesion or
bleeding.
any
Right.
of those kinds of
So very
things.
visual.
and then you have a visceral bodily response of disgust or fear or any of those things. And then you want to respond to the thing in the metaphor to which you've just cast it. So, if you're
Which would
talking
be a
about
behavior such as moving away from somebody who looks different than
exactly,
you, or
or
what
cutting
you
them
would
out,
do if they were sick. You're gonna
yes, or cutting them
encourage
out
them
from
to
the
leave.
community, or removing them from the community, or cutting them off from the community, all of this kind of stuff.
Mm.
So those metaphors are really, really important. And the body metaphor, that this metaphor that is at least 2,500 years old and is deeply, deeply ingrained. So Paul of Tarsus uses the body metaphor, and he's describing the early Christian community. So it's deeply embedded, the body of Christ. Metaphor is deeply, deeply embedded in Christian language. And also, this is also Greco-Roman language about the body of the state. If you've ever used the phrase head of state, that
Mm.
is a Greek phrase, and they literally meant the head of the social body of the community. It's like
Ah.
that body politic word, that phrase, that is 2,500 years old. And it comes with it draws on all of these other assumptions about what we think the body is and how it works and how it should work. And the body politic, whether in Paul's usage or in Greco-Roman usage or in any other usage that I've seen it in anywhere across the world throughout time, controls diversity in one of two ways: through hierarchy, do what I tell you to do or get out, or purity, which is follow the rules or get out. And purity can sometimes be more flat structurally, but it's very concerned about perfection in some kinds of ways. And hierarchy in hierarchically organized communities can actually hold a lot of diversity as long as everybody is following a certain set of rules.
Ah.
So
Ah.
the issue
Well,
for pluralists and anybody else who's trying to talk about how we build a diverse society that can actually function is what are the metaphors that we use to describe that society? Because again, this most common metaphor that we have for us as a community doesn't work. It just doesn't. And so we're fighting those of us in the pluralistic bridge building communities. We're really fighting to tell a story that makes sense emotionally.
and I was thinking about that. You need a slogan, and the slogan has to essentially tell the story. I was thinking about that for Nike's famous phrase, "Just
So
do
just
it."
do it.
So just do it is the slogan, and but the story is, I'm going to be the best person I can, which is very powerful because every single person on the planet wants to be the opportunity to be the best person they can. Very powerful. And so that's one of the reasons I thought your article was so interesting. So if you could, give us an example of some of the other metaphors that have been proposed for, I mean, how do we get Americans to think that, we're all different, but we can get together and work together?
For sure. There's a couple metaphors. I often see a big tent metaphor. It sort of seems to me to come out of politics. We're going to have a big tent. We're going to have a big tent. Everybody's included. Um, I see that around, including a lot of pluralistic spaces. I'm not a huge fan of that one as an option because to me, again, when you're using a metaphor, you have to think about all of the other things that it implies because it
That you're
is
going to be
usually
in one
implying
enclosed space together.
one enclosed place together, or that somebody erected that tent and is in charge of it, or maybe we're talking it's a three-ring circus, or like what are the other ideas that are kind of pulled up by that idea of the big tent? Another metaphor that I see around is the potluck. Ibu Patel at Interfaith America uses this one a lot. That, he's pushing back against the metaphor of America as the melting pot. He's like, I don't want to be melted together. I want to stay my unique self with his religious background and his particular sets of values and all of that. He wants to stay Ibu. He's not trying to be Alice and Ralph. But how do Ibu and Allison hang out together? And the answer is that, well, you go to a potluck together. You bring the things that are uniquely you, and you get to stay uniquely you in this metaphor. And it's a shared environment. Nobody's left out. Everybody gets to hold on to their differences. We're not trying to create a big melted puddle of goo that probably would not be very delicious. That's his metaphor. And I think it's a pretty good one.
Are there
Uh,
any that strike you? Are there any others that strike you as being actually possible of holding the power to, again, it's a gargantuan task
yeah.
to say, please consider leaving your team that you have had for your life and join us. I mean, to do that, the message and the metaphor has to be so strong. I mean, if you told me potluck, I'd be like, potluck? It's, it's okay, it's cheap, it's, but it's hardly a sexy metaphor to, really get me to do that. So is there one that's like, yeah, you've got hope for it, it's really going to work for you?
I have a personal favorite, which is a flocking metaphor or murmurations. You can see my background and my dress and my
Ah,
and my logo. There's a reason that I choose this theme, and that is in a murmuration, as you can see in the image behind me of this probably several thousand starlings. Um, you can see that there are individuals in the group, and you can see them co-creating together. That's what I think is really powerful about that flocking metaphor is that no individual is in charge. And you can see them split off from each other and come back together and go in one direction and move back. And there's a lot of play in that. It's very visual. Um, and you can see that real-time tension between what it means to figure out who you are as a human being and what it means to come together as a group. So I like that one. Uh, the word murmuration is quite hard also. It's not one that
right.
everybody
Or
knows.
even, yeah, or even like flocking. In other words, if you had a slogan, but then you were able to kind of show the birds and then show how we get together and so forth, that might work. But you're right. It makes you realize when you start thinking of this how difficult it is. How difficult it is to come up with an ad campaign to get people to work together. It's,
Yes.
you know, it's
Yeah.
fascinating. Most of them are still fall back on the whole one thing. So one garden, one group of birds, one and so forth. Is there a problem
Yeah.
with having that one entity as part of the idea? Or,
Hmm.
I mean, everything can come
Yeah.
down to
I
one.
think this is one of the reasons why the body metaphor is so intuitively so
Yeah.
helpful is that it really is an aggregate of parts, a collection of parts, and you can think of your arm as a whole, but also as separable into your fingers and your individual joints. Or you can say, oh, my, your limbs is separable from your body, and that's exactly how the ancients use that as well. So you can sort of intuitively get that your organs are sort of different than your limbs, for example, but that you're all joined together and working together. That's what makes the body metaphor really so powerful. Um,
And your body is your, I mean, it's your home, it's your place on the universe,
yeah,
right? And just because I think your idea of the flocking is a great one, but when you compare it to the body, you're like, it doesn't hold water. You know what I mean? It's not even comparable because it's like, so it's a very interesting thing. What could possibly bring it
yeah.
together?
I mean, that's why I think some of the other metaphors that describe the collective in some way, the potluck does that really well. That this is again a group of it is a grouping of individuals. The murmuration does that as a group of individuals. Um, so I think those metaphors that kind of highlight again the tension between the individual and the group are more intuitive to hold on to, but I suspect that the pluralistic and pro, we can say pro democracy fields, but even like just again the pro how are we going to live together
Yeah.
folks, how are we going to figure this out, are going to have to probably use a number of different um,
Just
metaphors in different situations.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. To get any metaphor to stick, doesn't the bridging industry need to come together to decide on which metaphor to use so people aren't confused? I was thinking about it.
Hmm.
For example, a garden is a very different metaphor than a choir, and I think that choir was also mentioned in your article.
Harmony,
As a
yeah.
citizen, I might identify with one. I'm a gardener, but I'm not a singer.
Hmm.
Right? Whereas, see, again goes back to the thing about the body being used because everybody's got a body.
Yep. Yes, I know. It
And
is
you're like,
incredibly powerful.
when you're looking at it, it just seems really, really a tough nut to crack.
I will say even the ancients didn't exclusively use the body metaphor. So, Paul, for example, famously uses the phrase a little yeast leavens a whole loaf. Um, so,
Hmm.
they're using other concepts and talking about other things as well. Um, they at least knew they were talking about the body metaphor and didn't have to make it visible. Part of I feel like I spent a lot of time making it visible. You know that phrase you've heard, body politic? That means something. It's
Uh,
doing something to your brain when you use it, basically. That's the argument I'm making. Um, so it is a real challenge. And I'm in so many of these like bridge building conferences and pluralistic spaces and oh, how are we going to get together? And so many of the folks in the kinds of world that I walk in, the circles that I run in but everybody's talking about narrative. How are we build a better narrative? How do we do this storytelling? And it's a theme that just comes up over and over and over again in these kinds of spaces that I'm in. I don't think any of us have sorted this out yet. It's just like, okay, we've really recognized that this is going to be a hard nut to crack. Uh, so I don't know.
I,
There's lots of really brilliant people working on it. I'm hopeful that maybe we'll come up with a way to do it, or maybe now is the moment that we will come up with a new way to use the body metaphor and a new way to tap into it um, that isn't held exclusively those two ways of that we've been using it for the last 2,500 years
yeah.
around kicking people out or telling them what to do.
Wow. That's one of the issues with, I think, the bridging community too. I think people may not realize that there are literally hundreds of bridging organizations. So to get people to come together and decide on one story, that's a tough one as
Yeah,
well. Everybody's got different ideas and, maybe brands to protect and what have you. So,
all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Well, you regularly work with organizations to research how they can take a pluralistic approach to problem solving. Your org does, as I was reading on your website, does surveys, interviews, evaluations. From your perspective, is the concept of pluralism catching on? If not, why not? And if so, how can you tell?
Hmm. That's a great question. I do think that there is more interest than ever. And this field has been growing by leaps and bounds over the last about 10 years now. There's more and more organizations in the States really trying to figure out how are we gonna stick together. There were
Mm.
a few before 2015, and now we have, I think, the most recent count of all sort of pro democracy, pro pluralism, pro bridging organizations, something like 11,000. It's quite a
Wow.
lot. So that's like again, including all the sort of pro democracy that would include advocacy and bridging and um, building organizations, all different kinds of stuff in that overarching under that umbrella. Yeah, that's a lot of folks doing a lot of different things. And that community has grown significantly in response to this. We hear so much in the news all the time. Oh, we're so polarized. We're so polarized. That's what anytime there's a an election result, it's oh well, this candidate on far left or far right, and nobody's in the middle, all that kind of stuff. That's the story that we're hearing from folks in the media. a lot. And so there is a whole set of folks now who are working to address that story of division. Um, I think that might actually be one of the central keys to solving this for pluralists is we spend so much time talking about how different we are and how it's going to be so hard to solve those differences. And I actually don't think it's that. I mean, maybe this is me and I am eternally optimistic, but I find working with folks who disagree with me pretty fun, actually. I find being in these spaces pretty fun. I think that may be part of the mindset that the pluralistic field needs to adopt is that this is less about dissolving our differences that are going to be, it's going to be so hard to do this, and more about, hey, this is interesting and fun, and I'm learning a lot, and this is about leadership, and I'm growing so much as a person to be able to do these things. So I feel like that's part of the mindset shift that the pluralistic field needs to make is about how we talk about our potential instead of the the sort of doom scrolling version of it as the oh no, the sky is falling.
I was always kind of just wishing it's like when I'm scrolling through like Instagram or something, what I'm looking for is like, is there a little video that shows two people and one says, I'm a Republican and the other person says, I'm a Democrat and we're friends. And just at the bottom, bridging movement. That's what the kind of thing I'm looking for is just something that visually shows this communion and how it can be among people. And I don't know if any organization is doing that, but maybe just starting to show people of differences, getting together and being happy about it, of different political viewpoints, and they're doing great. Because you're right, I've been part of these workshops, Braver Angels workshops, and you get together with other people and who have a different opinion, and it turns out to be really fun. Uh,
Yeah.
and it's something you cannot talk people into that unless they've experienced it. And so
Yeah,
the visuals might help people actually think, "Hmm, you know,
for sure. Yeah, it's a different way to tell that story. This is
right.
a lot of the bridging movement. I don't know. I will say my gut about the messaging is often like, eat your greens. It's good for you. It's like that's not going very well, you know.
Yeah,
Um, but it's, for me personally, getting to know people who are vastly different and who are always going to be different and believe very differently than me and vote differently than me. That's been the gift of my lifetime,
yeah,
even though it's not that I've given up my political positions. I still vote the way I vote and I argue for the things that I believe in. And having the relationships has totally changed my life for the better. It's been transformative. Um, and that's the thing that it's hard to get that across.
across. It
Yeah.
is. It is, and little
Yeah.
videos or something. But I'm waiting for that opportunity to come because I'd love to see that. We're having a national slogan competition for the bridging industry.
I love it.
Let's see what it is. Mine is I would like to see America for all. Nice and simple, right? But something of that nature, which gets people involved and gets them to thinking about what it would look like. In any case, we're dreaming here. I've got a last question for you.
Sure.
What gives you hope that pluralism in the bridging movement will catch on as a concept in our country so we can begin to see America as a place that works for all citizens and not just the majority that happens to be in power?
Yeah. Um, so as I already said, I'm a historian. And as a historian, you look back through history and there are so many periods of tremendous upheaval and often, incredible hurt and death and destruction. And those periods are often followed by periods of incredible creativity. And it's not just that one follows the other, it's that they're really tied in together. So periods of destruction or periods of falling apart, if we just want to put it that way. We're just periods of falling apart. Allow new things to happen. Allow are also periods of creativity, and new things are being reborn in those periods. And that is also happening right now. Like we just said, there's a 11,000 organization movement in the US that's this pro figuring it out movement. And
Right.
those folks are already doing that work of figuring out where do we go next? Not just how do we get back to where we were before whatever candidate you happen to not like and you think it all went downhill from there. Some
Right.
folks would
Of
tag that
course.
to Reagan, some folks would tag that to Obama. Some folks are going to blame JFK, right? Where there, whatever moment it was and whatever side it was, you think, it's all went downhill after that, happened. Um, that there is something new, something rebuilding, something that is going to come after this moment, right? It's not done. We haven't arrived. We are still moving and growing, and there is a huge opportunity right now to think about what comes next. And so, again, eternally optimistic, right? This may be a character flaw, but that is the thing that is really hopeful to me about, gosh, both ends of the political spectrum have been for decades arguing that we need to burn it all down. Well, here we are, folks. We're burning it all down. Now what? What are we gonna do? Let's
What's the
build that.
replacement story?
Yeah, let's build that. Let's focus there. Um, Rather than getting stuck in the, oh my God, it's all coming apart. Well, yeah, none of this has worked for a long time. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
have
I
to,
think for what it's worth, I am coming around to your point of view now because as I talk to more and more people, I do see these opportunities arising. And it is very fascinating. Everybody thinks it's doom and gloom, and it's like out of the doom and gloom comes something else.
for
And
sure.
that's fascinating. Well, I thank you so much for coming and talking to me. I could go on, and but I'll have to read your next articles, I assume.
Thank
So
you.
thanks for joining me.
It's been such a pleasure.
Yes. Thanks again to all of you who have listened to this episode. You can find a post and transcript of today's interview on my blog, Vigilant Positivity, and it's both on WordPress and Substack. And please join our cause.